everybody! Welcome to Bimbo Mentality, a podcast where we sit down with an expert and learn about science. We're gonna be science girlies. Sometimes we also talk about other things, but today we're gonna be learning about energy and environmental policy. My name is Bug, and joining me as always is my co-host Emma. How are you, my darling?
I'm doing wonderful today, actually. So really
Oh,
excited
hell yeah.
to chat tonight. Yeah, it's been a good day.
Hell yeah. And over in the booth, threatening to turn this car around is our producer Lilith. How are you?
I'm all right. As many on this call may know, I had my heart broken by baseball last night. But I'm getting over it. So
I'm sorry.
ready for a fun conversation.
You're on the Dodgers
Okay.
bandwagon now. It's okay.
Yeah, it's all fine.
So, to be clear, you do not want us to stop and console you over baseball for 20 minutes before we get
No,
into
no,
it?
If
no,
so, you
no.
booked the wrong guest.
Yeah, I've cried for I've cried enough in the last 24 hours. I might need a break from it actually.
That's fair. And joining us this week is our guest, Ian Hitchcock. Ian is an experienced energy and environmental policy researcher, having worked as a climate advocacy supporter and researcher in community groups, state legislatures, and Congress, as well as working in the Senate office of Bernie Sanders and as an environmental protection specialist with the EPA. Most recently, he has just published research on the environmental implications of the build-out of AI hyperscaler data centers. How are you doing, Ian? Super exciting to have you here.
It is super exciting to be here, and I'll try to not be, super depressing about the state of energy and environment and the tech world in the year of our
Yeah,
Lord 2025.
yeah,
I
we will.
promise there's some good news in here, even as
Sure.
the headlines may be grim.
Yeah, we will. We will certainly get into all of that. I did. First, I'll ask you, Emma. I very pointedly did not give you any prep material on this because I thought that would be funny. Is this something that you have any knowledge of?
Not at all. I'm actually a little nervous about how stupid I'm gonna sound. But I'm excited.
You're gonna do great.
So
You're gonna do so great.
For show,
I
Emma.
um,
I think it'll be
I
more about how good I am at explaining things, and that will determine, like, the only person who can be dumb on this podcast is me, because I might just explain
that's
things in a way that's too awful. So, like, please.
okay. You get
This is
it.
like perfect. This is perfect practice for like policy wonk, want to save the world type human to be like, okay, but no, but can you actually talk to people about things that matter? So like, it's actually great.
can you explain it to a ditzy blonde California girl? I get it. Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, if you can explain it to an LA beach blondie and a New York mall punk, then you can explain it to anybody.
And if the
That's
kids I grew
true.
up with in high school in Wyoming ever knew that I would be, explaining things to ditzy beachgoers from California and punk folks from New York, they would have had conniptions, and I love it.
Hell yeah. Um, I did read your recently published research on the AI hyperscaler data centers. I'm not gonna pretend that I understood all of it. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that I have any idea what carbon capture utilization is,
Mm,
but it seemed like the gist of what the sort of main takeaway from that document was that these companies could like actually build these out in a sustainable way, but they probably won't. Does that sound about accurate?
that's not necessarily the spin I would have put on it. Um, it's not entirely wrong. Let me put it this way. We know that the build out of data centers to service AI based digital services and tools, that is a thing that is happening in the world, right? Regardless of how I may or may not feel about it personally, like that is something that is happening. And so it seemed important to try to understand, what are some of the factors driving that build out? What are some of the ways in which the actors involved can make decisions to make it be better or worse for the environment? And how can we talk about some of the main environmental issues associated with these things. In particular, their very high energy demand and their very high water consumption in conjunction with each other. So in energy policy world right now, you are seeing a lot of people be very scared about what they're calling large load growth, which essentially means data centers which can be, demanding electricity on the order of magnitude of some small cities are popping up all across the landscape. And the people that are responsible for making sure that the grid works and that the lights turn on when you flip on the switch are freaking out about their ability to meet that load. So there's a lot of conversation in Energyland about how we can do that. And there are choices that could be better or worse for the environment about how you power these things. If AI data centers turn out to just be powered with more fossil fuel infrastructure, that will be a net negative for the climate and for the air pollution associated with the people that live either nearby to the power plants themselves or deal with the kind of extraction of frac natural gas on the back end. But also, water usage needs to be a part of that equation as well, because the sustainability impact of data centers is not just about energy, it's also about water. And there are choices and practices that companies can make to be more thoughtful about how they site this infrastructure in the first place, to think about water use, and in some of the ways they employ or recycle water or cool their data centers in the first place. So I should mention the energy use, I think, is obvious. You build a data center, basically a giant box filled with like a bunch of servers and computers and chips, and you put some power in it. That power spits out compute in some form, and that is the product that is coming out of these data centers. It powers the internet, it powers the Discord server that we're using to record this podcast, it increasingly powers AI training tools. The water piece comes in for cooling, because all of that computing generates a tremendous amount of heat. And so water is necessary in some extent to ensure that these computer chips and these processors and these data centers themselves stay cool enough to operate. So, all that to say, the likelihood of whether or not large tech companies in particular adopt sustainable practices really depends on how serious they are about their sustainability commitments. One of the reasons that we picked hyperscalers, which are essentially the large tech companies, to focus on and talk about in this report, is because they do have sustainability goals and commitments that, to their credit, they have demonstrated some resilience in holding firm to, in the spite of some kind of political pressures from the current DC administration. And they've done things like more for renewable electrons at times when they could have gotten electricity cheaper. So there's some opportunity and potential to use the hyperscalers' sustainability goals, the big tech companies' sustainability goals, their need for kind of operational efficiency, and for their investments in these data centers, which are mostly, very expensive chips, to be sustainable, not just from an environmental standpoint, but from an economic one. If you are building a data center in the desert and you run out of water to cool it, then you won't be able to use that data center. And so whether or not it is likely that data centers driven by hyperscalers will be, as we title the report, a sustainability bane, boon, or both, I think it's much more likely to be more on the bane side and less on the boon side if we're having thoughtful, intelligent conversations about the actual resource implications of this infrastructure. Because one of the things, and then I'll let you get to another question, that's been frustrating in this debate has been when companies talk about AI and climate, they often talk about it in the context of how can we use AI tools to develop new climate technologies, to more efficiently manage the electric grid. All of these things are true and there's some validity there, but it doesn't get around the fact that the potential climate benefits of using AI tools are highly speculative, unclear how they'll materialize. That doesn't mean they won't happen, but it just means they're not a guarantee. Meanwhile, the actual resource use of the data centers that are the backbone of digital infrastructure is real, is occurring now, and is something that we need to thoughtfully manage. So the hope with putting out a report like this was to create an environment for these kinds of conversations, because these kinds of conversations make it much more likely that sustainability needs will be taken into consideration in this kind of race to build up data centers, to compete with China, to have the most compute, whatever, that's really driving the billions of dollars of investment in this infrastructure to date. So, sorry, I know that was a lot. I was just trying to set the table there.
I did like learning from the report that the way that like computers get cooled off is just like water, because often that's also how I cool off. And so
It's
I
so
feel like I
it's
was
so
really
relatable.
very much related to the computer on that. I like to think that it's just like sort of dumping large volumes of water on the computer,
Yeah, it, it,
like
it
sort of a
it's
sprinkler sprinkler
it's
system type deal.
definitely not that. But continue.
Like one of those like misty things you walk through when you're at the zoo.
Oh,
That's
I
sort of
love
what
those
I
misty
imagine,
things.
right?
Yeah.
That's sort of what I
Um.
imagine that is
Yeah. No.
happening there.
Also, definitely not that. Essentially, what it is twofold. So you've got your standard kind of industrial chip, right? That essentially use evaporative cooling to cool down the entire space that these computer chips operate under. That tends to use a lot of water. It's not necessarily the most efficient. One thing we're seeing more of is this push for direct to chip cooling, which is essentially having an infrastructure where you have a cooling fluid that is mostly water but comprised of a bunch of other chemicals cycling and circulating very basically right next to the computer chips and helping them cool down that way. Now, that doesn't mean that fun zoo sprinkler might not be the environmental solution that we've needed all along. Certainly, I know it's the solution that I need on a hot summer day when I'm wandering around the zoo. Um, I think the reason to focus on water in this report was more to make sure that, especially in water scarce areas, which are seeing, we talk about Arizona as a case study, a lot of data center build out because land is relatively cheap there and
Mm.
access to electricity tends to be easier there than in other places for a bunch of reasons we can talk about. Um, that's why a lot of data centers are going there, but that doesn't seem to be taking into account the availability of water. And what I want to help make sure of is that the data centers aren't so thirsty for water in these water scarce areas, which, by the way, water scarcity and drought is just getting worse. Like you and I both spent some time in Vermont, and droughts weren't really a thing when we were in Vermont, and they were very much a thing this year. So it's not just like the areas that are water scarce now, it's the areas that could increasingly become more water scarce as climate change continues its rampage of changing the way in which the world operates. And we've got to make sure that we're thoughtful about that where we're putting things so that the next time you want to run through a sprinkler, if you happen to be doing it in somewhere near Arizona or another water scarce area, that the data center hasn't guzzled all of the water itself and not left it for some of these other uses.
Yeah, I mean, there's this thing about the sustainability conversation that I think, comes up sometimes, especially with sort of political radicals like us, but that I feel like has sort of fallen out of the mainstream conversation, which is that, holy shit, climate change is really, really bad.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we should try to not do that.
Been beating on that drum for a while and will continue to beat on it as long as I can because yeah, the reason that I've decided to try to devote my professional life to addressing climate crisis in various forms is because I recognize that a lot of the other things that I care about in the world, whether it's, you know, equal rights for marginalized groups, social justice, you know, environmental protection, um, equity, and access to things like healthcare, like all of those things that I care about, that people have fought, marched, bled, and died for, are at risk in a destabilized world where the climate isn't creating the kind of conditions necessary for our civilization as we've known it to thrive. And more pointedly, the sheer injustice of the fact that it's the communities that have done the least to cause the problem of climate change in terms of emissions and having their consumption generate greenhouse gas emissions that are being hit first and worst by climate impacts. That is fundamentally unjust on a global level, to say nothing about the generational injustice of young people today and generations yet to be born who are already going to have to live with the consequences of a world that is more unstable, more dangerous, more full of extreme weather events, and all the political uncertainty that comes along with that as a result. So, yeah, couldn't agree more that climate change is really bad. The thing that keeps me up at night is the uncertainty around ecological tipping points. The fact that there are things like Atlantic sea currents, which are the reason why Europe is kind of warm and habitable and lovely right now. Like if that current reverses, then we're in trouble.
I don't know how to pronounce the word, but the thermohaline circulation, right?
Yes, I think
Yeah,
I'm getting a little bit out over my energy focused skis. I'd have to ask my meteorology friends. But I think you're right that that's what
yeah.
the current is called.
Basically the taken to a much less extreme version of the plot of The Day After Tomorrow, with the Gulf Stream shutting down.
Right? Which I hate, because that was just not a good movie, right? Like,
no, it's so
can we
bad.
agree on that? But I hate that it's like
there
a
were-
decent cultural touchstone to be like, yeah, that's basically what Paris will be if that Gulf Stream shuts down.
It's like that movie had there was a pack of human eating wolves in New York City randomly. I don't know how there was a lot. It was a lot.
It's wild because when, the people where I grew up with in Wyoming would, complain about wolves being dropped in their backyard and whatnot, not an attitude I shared, but one that was common near me. They would often say, oh, well, how would you like it if we dropped wolves in, New York City and you guys had to live with them? So my headcanon for why that happened in that movie is that the people from Wyoming actually got their wish and airdropped a pack of wolves into Central Park and be like, oh, see how you guys like it.
Wait, that would actually be
God.
dope, though.
Isn't it so fucked up that The Day After Tomorrow ended up being the thing that we needed to be afraid of when AI takes over, and not like Terminator? Like Terminator warned us about AI, but then no, it's actually going to be like climate collapse that AI causes, and not that Chat GPT is going to turn into a fucking super soldier, right?
Yeah, it's way less metal. We're not going to get that scene in Terminator 2 with the nuke in Los Angeles. I mean, hope not, because that would be bad for me personally. But but
And also for that wine crop we were talking about earlier.
Chances.
Luckily, I'm in California, a state that is immune from climate extremes with climate change. So
right.
Definitely.
You say that. How's your air filter running from the wildfire smoke these days, from the season that never ends?
Oh my God, I could see the Palisades fire from my apartment roof.
Gosh, that's
earlier this year. It was terrifying. Because I lived in California for 10 years, and I'm used to the smoke from wildfire season getting into when I lived in San Francisco or LA, but it's one thing to get smoke from 150 miles away. It's another to be oh, the hillside is literally on fire and looks like a hellscape is another. And yeah, so I'm definitely listening with keen interest to
Indeed.
this subject right now.
And let me tell you all about some of the ways which this kind of data center build out might actually be helpful on the climate front. Because that may not be readily apparent. We've kind of talked a lot about some of the resource implications of the data centers, and those are real. I don't want to understate them at all. But there are some avenues.
I would think that if the sea levels rise, then that's so much more water you can dump on the computers.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, Bug. You do your data center sandcastle slash bucket energy, see if you can get NVIDIA to lend you a few chips that they're not, selling to China now or whatever. And we'll get back to us on that.
I'll dump a bucket of water on my computer right now, and I bet it will be so much cooler.
It'll definitely improve the podcast, for sure. Your listeners will be like, we don't have to listen to this environmental policy nerd anymore. Thank God.
I'm guessing the reason we can't
now.
do that is the same for like just water needs in general. I'm guessing, is it the salt that is making that difficult to do? Can we not cool things with? Can we cool data centers with salt water? Is that possible?
To the best of my knowledge, no.
Got it.
Hey, producer Lilith here. I can this can be my little contribution. I work in IT. The heat conductivity of different there's a lot of different like mixtures that you can use for like liquid cooling, and salt water, like you're literally just going down. As far as I'm aware, you are decreasing the heat conductivity of the liquid, so you're making it less efficient in cooling when you're using salt water as opposed to fresh water. And efficiency is in the name of the game with a lot of these kinds of things, and so salt water just doesn't make sense to use for cooling computers.
And it's interesting because like salt, like molten salt for energy storage, like that is that practice that was just described, or that tendency of salt to basically, absorb and retain more heat, is something that's actually been used in different contexts as one form of energy storage. Molten salt is something that is being experimented with for kind of long duration energy storage, because right now, and that's one of the avenues in which, helping to have a demand for long-term energy storage products could be very useful from data centers, because all of these things have 100% backup power, right? The data center doesn't ever want to go down if the grid goes out. It doesn't want to have a power outage be a problem for its ability to keep pumping out compute or, research metamaterials or put out AI generated videos or whatever it's doing.
Little cats on skateboards and that kind of garbage.
God knows we could not live a second without that, right? Oof.
I love a cat on a skateboard, but a depiction of a cat on a skateboard is not any good to me. If I'm gonna see a cat on a skateboard, it better be a goddamn cat.
Right?
On a goddamn skateboard.
We have real life squirrels that can water ski. Why do I care about a fake cat that can skateboard?
Wait.
Because you can make...
ski?
Yeah, we do need to rewind to that.
Oh yeah, I've definitely seen a video of a real squirrel that has been trained to like be on a little water ski. It is 100%.
Well, I 100% believe you, no questions asked.
Right, and that's also
producer Lilith is gonna have to hold on. I know the video you're talking about.
Am I being fact checked in real life?
Is this going to be like a bears on trampoline moment where I like sent that video of like the bears on the trampolines to like all my friends and was like, look at the bears on the trampolines, isn't it funny? And then had to be like, damn it, they got me.
Well, now I feel like we have 2 animal videos to fact check.
I did fact check it, and actually Twiggy the water skiing squirrel was an animal novelty act featuring an eastern gray squirrel who skis around a heated pool. Apparently this is completely real.
Yes, I told you.
Can we get Twiggy the water skiing squirrel as a guest on Bimbo Mentality, the podcast?
Twiggy the water skiing squirrel was adopted in 1978.
Do you all have like squirrel chatter? Like, is Squirrel Girl going to also be on the podcast so like listeners can understand what the squirrel is saying? Like, what's the plan there?
Is this the second time in 2 episodes that the Marvel comic superhero Squirrel Girl?
No, really?
Yes, it is. We need to work her into every episode going forward.
Sub theme, y'all. She doesn't come out much in the data center world, so just gonna say. Yeah. Far more interesting life.
Oh my god. Okay, wait. Tell me more about like Morton salt being used. Like that's the one with the little girl in the. Wait, you said something else.
Molten salt, but I.
Oh my god.
That's
Oh my
Hilarious.
god. Oh my god.
There,
Delete. Delete.
there may or may not be a little girl involved.
No, that's
I don't know.
absolutely going in.
No. God damn it.
So
I was like, wait,
Love
table
you.
salt can be used to store energy?
molten salt is one form. It's an
Oh my
example
God.
of how. So going back to how data centers need 100% backup power. Right now, today, a lot of that backup power comes from diesel generators. Diesel generators are pretty dang polluting. They're pretty dirty. They obviously require fossil fuels to be burned to power them. And so some low-hanging fruit as far as data center sustainability is to replace that backup power generation with energy storage of some form, whether it's like giant gigawatt scale batteries or, other kinds of, there's this really cool kind of ion air battery, they call it, where essentially uses the process of rust to store energy. It's wild.
What?
Whatever the energy storage technology is, like that's a case where like, we don't necessarily know what storage technologies are winning out, but certainly by switching away from backup generation by diesel generators to some form of energy storage, ideally paired with co-location of renewable energy. So hopefully you can, slap some solar panels or wind turbines near these facilities. That's one potential solution. But a further out one and potentially more impactful one is the investments that some of these big tech companies are making in sources of energy that we call clean, firm power. And these are next generation sources of power that tend to be things like advanced geothermal, small modular nuclear, and to some extent carbon capture utilization, CCS, essentially when you try to capture the carbon that comes off of a usually natural gas fired turbine so that it doesn't go and pollute the atmosphere. All of those probably have some role to play, but the thing that makes the tech world's investment in them possibly game changing is that we're going through a moment right now where the federal government has, stepped back in many ways from its role in supporting and accelerating next generation technologies, particularly anything coded as climate tech. So wind,
to say the
solar.
least.
Yes, I'm understating it a bit, I suspect. But those are technologies that this administration seems pretty clearly opposed to existing in some pretty unprecedented ways. They won't win.
Yeah, they hate things that are good and love things that are bad.
That does seem to be my read on their priorities. It's a fun time, but the business world tends to have slightly longer time horizons than 4 years, and the economics of clean energy largely have already won, right? Like the cheapest electron that you can generate with a new source of electricity today remains a renewably powered one. And that means that at the end of the day, renewable energy will triumph in the market. The question is, will renewable energy come about, at least from a climate perspective, will renewable energy be adopted quickly enough and make enough of an impact on emissions in the near term to forestall bad climate effects, a la tipping points that we're uncertain of when we actually cross the thresholds, and that sort of thing. Yeah,
I have a question for you. So like I've heard that, and I feel like it's always 20 years away. I think you know where I'm going with this, but like I have heard that if we were to ever solve commercially viable fusion, that we would have like essentially like it's not renewable, but there's enough like what's it called? The stuff you need to make the reaction. There's enough on Earth that like that would be like a game changer and might save us. But I feel like, do you feel like we won't need that, or do you feel like that's a race against time to get there before we before we hit one of these tipping points?
Right. So fusion would absolutely be a game changer. I'm not well versed enough in the science of it to be able to give you like a really like great read on like is it possible or feasible other than to like agree with your assessment that it always seems like it's 20 years away? Um, People whose webinars I listen to seem to feel more optimistic about its potential now. Um, Whether or not that materializes is an open question to me. For me, it's like I think about it fusion like, okay, that would be a game changer that would solve a lot of our problems. Um, and I very much hope that it happens, but neither will I put all of my eggs for like a sustainable, livable, and habitable future for, or even present, in the basket of that kind of long shot, hard to operationalize, commercialize tech. Some of the other things I've described are likely coming on a much quicker timescale, going off of more kind of proven technology that would just need to be scaled up and then have its price come down in such a way that it could be widely deployed. And this is where the data centers come in because they want
Okay.
to meet their renewable energy obligations largely. From what I can see, that does seem genuine. Um,
You know what I you know what I love to put on the eggs I have in my basket? A little bit of Morton salt.
Yeah, more salt.
Oh my
I thought you
God,
might say. I thought
stop.
you might say like plutonium or something. Like I don't know where we were going with this.
I'm
Sorry,
Yeah,
I
never gonna
saw
live
the
this down.
I was I was set up for the joke and I took it. Anyway,
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
interrupted
Oh, it's
something
never stopped me.
serious and important you were saying.
No, it's all good. It's all good. No, I'm not salty about that interruption at all. Um,
Heyo.
so these tech companies want to meet their sustainability goals. They need baseload power. They need power all the time, and they are actually taking steps to work with some of the companies that are doing advanced geothermal drilling, for instance, or are some of have put out some of the first contracts to try to buy power from small modular nuclear reactors. And while there are, these technologies are in different stages of development, but they're all way closer than fusion in terms of like there have been some demonstration projects, and now it's a question of kind of getting them operationalized, getting the cost down. And the thing about working with the hyperscalers is that they're far less cost sensitive than just about anyone else. So generally when you need a new technology to be adopted, there's what they call the, cost adoption curve, which essentially it's really expensive when something is new. You guys probably remember this from like iPhone days, right? Of like the shiny new iPhone is really expensive. And then the more people buy iPhones, the cheaper they get down the line, and then new technology comes out and whatnot. That probably is not the best example of this, but I was trying to think on the fly of like one that would make sense to a listener. Um, and these tech companies have the potential to not only help in the development and the demonstration of some of these clean firm technologies, but to actually be among the first people who are willing to buy them, buy the products from them, buy the clean energy from them when it's still expensive, and then make them much more accessible for other people and other uses to do it. And they could be by the thing that is not often talked about in the energy space is that it's not just the price of an electron of kind of, how much energy per kilowatt hour do you get that matters as much anymore. It is also the characteristic of that electron. What I mean by that is if you're operating the grid, you've got to balance supply and demand at all time. A solar panel that is not generating as much electricity at night when people are coming home and turning on their TVs, cook stoves, lights, is less useful to you because it's not accessible to you at that moment where you need to ramp up to meet people's electric demand. Storage can help with that, and storage has a big part to play in, making renewables as we know them today be a helpful solution here. But this clean firm push is something that I genuinely have some degree of optimism around, not only because it could help power data centers in a cleaner way than if they go the route of relying on fossil fuel plants, but because it could help us bring some technologies to the fore, not fusion necessarily, but some other ones that can also help to provide clean electrons that can be ramped up and ramped down and helps grid operators that have to maintain the stability and the reliability of the electric grid at all times uh, actually manage that load. So when I was talking at the outset about there being like plenty of reasons for despair and some reasons for hope, it is the potential of this kind of alignment of data center needs, hyperscaler goals, and things that the billions of dollars of money that they're investing in data center operations could actually help bring us closer to. We think of it as a demand forcing mechanism, we call it, which is basically economic speak for a thing that people want real bad. And that could be tremendously useful. And so part of what our task is now then is to figure out, okay, what are some of the things that we can do in the meantime, in between, now and the early 2030s when some of these technologies I'm describing might actually come online to ensure that this large load growth fueled by data center demand, but not exclusive to it, actually happens in a way that is not a sustainability in a climate catastrophe. And so that gets into some of the other things we talk about in the report about load flexibility. So trying to help data centers be able to ask less power from the grid at times when everyone else needs a lot of it. And maybe being a resource that with some of that battery storage we talked about earlier, maybe something that grid operators could tap into when they need more power, that keeps them from, say, turning a dirty oil polluting peaker plant online, for example. So I realized that was probably a lot of like enviro lingo, and please help me like make it make sense if that little ramble didn't. Um, but that's an important part of the story too that I want to make sure comes across.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I'm kind of backtracking here a little bit to when you were talking about like a lot of the consequences of climate action or of a climate catastrophe falling on the sorts of communities that don't actually contribute to climate change. And so when I hear that like um, major tech companies are sort of investing in meeting sustainability goals, my thinking is just like, well, I should damn well think so,
Mm,
because like I think a lot of the tech ramp up is. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but a lot of like tech ramp up is part of the problem.
I don't necessarily disagree, right? Um, and I think there are far broader cultural conversations that we need to be having around you know resource consumption, allocation, economic justice, and environmental justice in terms of how the benefits and burdens of all sorts of ways that we use our natural environment, not exclusive to tech, um, come into the fore. So I don't think you are wrong there at all. Um, what I'm trying to do, for better or for worse, in this moment, is try to figure out at a time when the federal government went from, potentially being a real partner toward getting us some of the climate solutions we need to the complete opposite of that. What are we left with other than existential despair and lawsuits, which I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not equipped to do. Um, and that's kind of what has led me to this particular direction. So
Sure.
it is this is a pragmatic attempt, and I imagine that word is probably poison to some ears, and I can understand why it would be. Um, but all I can do is kind of speak to my good faith intentions to try to help the world and those whose decisions have an outsized influence on its future make
Yeah.
decisions that are for the betterment of humanity and not the worst. But that doesn't mean that that's the only way one can or should go about it, or that that will be anything close to sufficient to meeting the scale of like not just the climate crisis, but all of the other questions the climate crisis raises about our relationship with the natural world, about how we treat some places and some people as disposable resource sacrifice zones to be kind of exploited and extracted from. There are a lot of bigger conversations that I think meaningfully grappling with climate invites us to take. And this, research that we've been talking about is kind of one small sliver of the moment right now.
For sure. I think, you're it's funny. You're being very like buttoned up and professional about it. I can tell you're sort of going on a very different tact than I will of saying that right now the federal government is operated by a dumbass surrounded by evil people. Um, and uh that does, I mean, I see what you mean, like that obviously changes the conversation quite a bit. I am curious about your thoughts from um a policymaking perspective, about what things might look like when the turn back happens, because
Mm.
right now these major tech companies are interested in meeting their sustainability goals from what it sounds like, from what you're saying, a sort of innovation and market and meeting demand perspective.
It's just
But that,
it's yeah, it's a self-interested one, right? It's not one that's being
right,
imposed externally by a regulator. Um,
right. And I was
in
I
part
was
because the
gonna say
regulators
that's
don't exist right now. I mean, that's the work I wanted to do, right? Like that's what
right.
I went to grad school to do, was to go kind of be a watcher on the wall. And so it's been interesting for me personally to kind of navigate the, having that professional path taken away from me from the hopefully in the short term. We'll see what shape the federal government is when this administration is done with it, and if and how the rebuilding occurs, hopefully for the better.
Yeah, and I guess I was just curious from the policymaking perspective if there is these companies that may be interested in this from a self-preservation perspective and a market perspective. That doesn't mean that they're any less allergic to regulation than they've always been. And I'm curious, just in your opinion, on how likely you think a sort of cooperative approach to this uh, it could ever happen, if there could ever
Hmm.
be, you know, if these major tech companies could ever find their way to working cooperatively with regulatory bodies to actually, you know, m actually meet the requirements for climate
Well, right, and
sustainability.
and and one, we would have to have those requirements, right? That's step one,
Right.
which right now we don't. And every moment that goes by, it's one that gets us closer to those climate tipping points we were talking about. Let me say this: in the data center world, the hyperscalers also aren't the only game in town, right? There are a lot of people that are not big tech companies building data centers, and from what I've been able to see from that world, those people couldn't care less about sustainability by and large. They care about building their data centers quickly, getting to market, and operating as quickly as possible. There's a bit of a gold rush going on right now in data center build out world. Is my read on that landscape. That may not be true of all of them, but that seems to be a, a common theme. And regulation is the only tool that I'm aware of that will actually make an entire sector behave in certain ways. And, essentially what we're talking about with data center energy and water use is the classic kind of externalities problem, which is essentially, that's economic speak for a problem caused by one actor that they don't have to suffer the consequences from, but that falls on someone else. Um, and so that would be an example of, if a community runs out of water in Washington State because the data center nearby is drinking all of it, that is a negative externality that data center has imposed on that community. Um, and the classic approach, really the only approach that I'm aware of that ever comes remotely close to meeting to addressing the problem of externalities, especially when there's such a power differential between kind of the companies at play and the communities at risk, is regulation. And that's part of why, you know, this administration and those who are enabling it and those who kind of laid the groundwork in right wing circles for 20 years to, do Project 2025 and everything that entails are very much at war with the ability of us to have a regulatory state at all because they recognize the threat that poses to their ability to, rampage uh, and pillage the world as they see fit and to pursue profit over all else. So policymaking has a foundational role, a key role in giving the broader society the tools to push back on rapacious exploitation.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it goes back to your, I know you mentioned like early on about we were talking about, you have history with the EPA, right? And
Mm.
so, I mean,
I
what
shouldn't
was that?
overstate it. It was, it was a summer internship, right? But it was not. That's not
Hey,
nothing. Yeah.
hey, that's not nothing.
It's
What was
more than I've done for the
the
EPA.
what was that the famous book Silent Spring, right?
Mhm.
That led to the movement that helped like lead
Right.
to the movement led to the creation of the EPA. And I
Right.
think
Created by now. Okay, pop quiz. Do y'all know which president signed the legislation that put EPA into action? Who was our,
It was
arguably
Nixon, wasn't
best?
it?
It was Nixon. Yep.
oh my god, I did not know
Yep.
that.
I was I was a U.S. history major.
Wow, that's wild.
So sorry,
Yeah,
Emma.
no,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say you're absolutely right. Like I think we cannot control like we can't trust profit driven entities like corporations to do the right thing. They have to be forced into it because, like you said, the power imbalance between a multinational corporation that's like dumping sewage next to a town community, right? Like, is never going to be beaten by like isolated individuals in said community. You need like a stronger arm of the law, so to speak.
Well,
So,
and these things
um,
often play off each other, right? Like it is, the EPA and kind of our infrastructure of, public health protections and infrastructure and agencies and regulation was an outgrowth of the environmental movement, which was itself a response to the environmental degradations that people were experiencing day to day. So things got bad enough, particularly with smog in cities. There were cases of toxic smog, people literally dying because the air was poisonous to breathe because of industrial pollution, that caused uproars. Those uproars were then responded to by politicians, and those politicians put in place policies that created institutions, and those institutions provided a check, however kind of inadequate or not at times, against the conditions that created that kind of harm in the first place. And to get to something you were saying earlier, Bug, in terms of like, is there ever an opportunity for cooperative work between companies and policymakers? I mean, yes, there is, but there's also a real danger there. Because if companies get too close to government and to policymakers, or the revolving door of, people go work for the companies and then go work as the regulators and go back to work for the companies, rinse and repeat, you run the risk of what we call regulatory capture, which is essentially this notion that the regulators become so close to the entities they're trying to regulate that relationship ultimately weakens their ability or interest in regulating in the first place. At the same time, it's true that you cannot regulate an industry without understanding what that industry is. And that's especially challenging when we're talking about something like tech adoption, because the tech is moving so quickly. And policymaking, even when it's operating under a well intentioned and thoughtful administration, is inherently slow. Um, and it kind of has to be in order to take into consideration stakeholder perspectives, understand what the unintended consequences of some of these rules might be, allow people to comment, etc. Like, there are ways in which it can and should be much more efficient, to be clear. I'm not trying to give, all regulations a pass on, taking too long to respond to the moment. But there is just always going to be this fundamental mismatch between the speed at which a tech is being kind of deployed and experimented on and, put out into the world, and the regulations designed to come up with it. I mean, one of the things I think that's interesting about the moment when it comes to AI is that, unlike a lot of the other technological innovations that we've seen that came out of federal defense spending or research spending in some sense, so I'm thinking of, like the internet largely coming out of, DARPA, the defense research arm, that AI tools are a technology that has largely been developed outside of the traditional government sources of funding, which provided some degree of check and, if not public input, at least public servant input on what this technology might be and how it would develop in ways that were not seen at all with AI, because it didn't come out of any government shops whatsoever. And I think that makes this moment all the more challenging and makes us need to think through, how do we ensure that our policy processes are up to the speed with which the problems of modern society are occurring, and that's climate, that's tech adoption, that's economic inequality, that's housing development, that's healthcare access, like the list goes on and on. And oh, by the way, politics matters a lot here too, because the people who win elections and wield political power set the agenda for what policies are even in consideration, and who they'll listen to, or who they care about. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in, and I appreciate you're kind of bringing this question to well, what's the role of policy in all this? Because, like, as someone who, mastered in public policy, I did it because I had this same sense that policy is ultimately the tool that we have to mitigate the worst and promote the best. Whether or not that's always how it plays out in practice is a different question. But we're living in times now that demonstrate that the politics matters a ton as well. And I hope that people think of, political action, getting involved in elections, running for office themselves, organizing support candidates who share their values, as something they can do to help address the existential issues of our time, up to and including climate crisis, or even something as small as the data center build out. Because we won't have rules on data centers unless we have people in power that think that we need to have rules on data centers.
Cool. Well, we've been going for a little bit now. I think it is time to talk a little bit about what we have learned. So, Emma, what have you learned today?
Gosh, so much. One, I learned that we are using Morton salt to store energy, or want to. And
It's crazy. It's crazy that we do that, that we actually literally do that.
I love when I spread misinformation on podcasts.
Mhm.
The other is that I was really loving the part at the end there about talking about how, like, policymaking is one of our best tools in our arsenal, but it's like constantly trying to keep up with an ever, like, exponentially increasing, like, march of, quote unquote progress, but, like, at the expense of like most of the world for, the, like, privileged countries. And I think, like, it's this, like, never ending sort of push and pull and chase, that we're trying to solve, while also trying to avoid those tipping points. And so it kind of feels like a little bit of like a game of whack-a-mole. But I really respect the folks that I have a newfound respect today for the folks that are in the trenches trying to, if we can't stop the ship, then let's at least steer it into the safe harbor, And so I think that's what I learned today.
I have learned that you cannot cool off a computer just by dumping a bucket of water on it. I learned a lot about the plots of Day After Tomorrow and Terminator 2, both of which are movies that I have not seen.
Wait, what?
What?
At least watch Terminator 2. Yeah.
This is
Like,
this may be the first time this has come up on the podcast, but I have not watched any movies. I've watched like 0 movies.
I believe we have
Um,
discussed this. Yeah.
didn't we watch some movies in school?
I mean, we probably watched like 1 or 2, but they were all like. Anytime we would do a movie night in college, it would be like the NBC live version of Grease, which
Yeah,
none of
that's
us
fair.
liked.
Yeah, that's fair.
What? Okay, wait, what about like Jurassic
Um,
Park?
I have seen the first Jurassic Park. Yeah.
Okay, that's what
That's
I.
all you
Yeah,
need. That's
that's
all you need.
okay.
Yeah.
That's all you need. Anything about like the not stopping to think about whether you should, and that's like I feel like that's science in a nutshell. But
Oh
continue.
yeah. I've learned that science has a lot to do with Jurassic Park, and I've learned that I guess I've learned to like not despair. I guess that even when it seems like things are really kind of runaway and out of control, and that we are sort of making decisions in the realm of big tech that nobody seems to really care that much about the consequences, that like at least there are mitigating factors at play that may help to keep us away from the absolute worst case scenarios while we actually figure out how to do this, not just sort of in the most basically sustainable way, but in an actually like responsible way. Now, my final question for you here, Ian, before we wrap up. Now, having heard our takeaways, do you feel like you have successfully thought like a bimbo enough to explain your area of expertise to us today?
I mean, definitely the fact that, we were talking about table salt is really the main takeaway I wanted to leave y'all with for sure. So, yeah,
Look, Morton and Bolton are so close together.
they are, and
And
we are podcasting across like multiple audio
Mhm.
recordings going at once across the continent, enabled. Thank you, big tech. So we'll give it that. But
Shout out Big Tech.
right, which I'm sure gets lots of
woo!
shout outs as the podcast goes on. No, I mean I appreciate y'all giving me the space to kind of ramble in your general direction. Um, I as I was saying before, like this isn't necessarily the space that I even a year ago would have expected to be in. And I too was, glad and surprised that even while there's no certainty about what direction things will go in terms of the state of the world, in terms of the state of our decisions about how we treat the environment, to at the very least learn that like we are still very much in the fight of there are decisions that can be made that would make things better. Like that gives me kind of the hope, not in a like passive way, but in a very active like, okay, how can I work to make sure that the world is better as a result of what I and others are trying to put into it than it could have been otherwise. And so I'm glad that came across, if nothing else.
Truly, you do not have to like understand every aspect of this to know the importance of creating a better world and avoiding catastrophe, and you don't need to be an expert in energy policy to care about your communities and your neighbors and the importance of um, protecting the environment. And that's bimbo mentality, baby. Ian, do you have anything you want to plug? Any cool things coming up or anything cool you're working on?
I mean, there might be a chance to do some of this kind of work in an international context. Um, I can't say too much more at the moment, but this data center build out is not just something that's happening in the U.S. It has the potential to be a global phenomenon, and so there are some early conversations about doing this kind of research in other places and other contexts that are exciting.
Cool. Well, maybe this has been a really, really cool conversation. Maybe in the future we will have you back to talk about some of that stuff.
Always happy to chat with you.
Oh yeah.
Thank you. This was
Um
so fun.
that about wraps it up for Bimbo Mentality this week. Tune in next week when we talk about punk rock.